Good afternoon. Thank you for attending and welcome to the meeting of the Finance Committee. The meeting today is open to the public, however, Appendix 3 of the report at item 9 on the agenda and appendices to item 11 on the agenda are not available to the public or press because they contain exempt information related to financial and business affairs. If members wish to discuss information in these documents, we will need to ask the members of the public and press to kindly leave for that part of the meeting, and we will pause the webcast. The meeting will be webcast and the recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. It is also possible that Sheffield Live TV will record and rebroadcast this meeting. We have received 7 questions from 1 member of the public and no petitions. Please can I request that all mobile phones and such equipment are switched to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. There are no fire test plans for today. If there's an emergency evacuation, please take instructions from the Town Hall staff. The assembly point is Tudor Square. For the benefit of the webcast, please can I ask each Finance Committee member to introduce themselves, and I'll start with you, Councillor Chaplin.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Chaplin. I'm a councillor for Southey Ward.
Mary Lee, councillor for Darnell Ward.
Good afternoon. Ibi Urla, councillor for Netheridge and Sharrow.
Good afternoon. Marianne Elliott, Green Councillor for Gleadless Valley.
Toby Mallinson, Green Councillor for Hillsborough.
Shafat Mohammed, Ecclesall Ward.
Glynis Chapman, Mosborough Ward.
Andrew Sanger, Forward Ward. I'm substituting for Councillor Mike Leavery.
Thank you, everybody. If officers can introduce themselves when they are doing their presentations, thank you. Item 1, apologies for absence. Councillor Mike Leavery has sent his apologies and Councillor Sanger is replacing him today. Item 2, exclusions of press and public. Appendix 3 of the report at item 9 on the agenda and appendices to item 11 on the agenda are not available to the public or press. Item 3, declarations of interest. Is there any declarations of interest? Councillor Sanger.
Thank you, Chair. Personal interest, item 11. My son owns and lives in a flat on Cotton Mill, so looking at the principles of public life, I will be leaving the meeting and not taking part in that discussion. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sanger. Any other declarations of interest? No. Item 4, minutes of the previous meeting. You can find these on page 11 of the agenda pack. Can we approve these? Are these a correct record? Councillor Elliott?
Can I just ask a question on these minutes? It was because we made a decision to approve a lease, so that was at section 8.4, page 13. At the time it was True North Brewery, but I note that obviously the lease was in the name of KS Yeardley FCB Limited Pension Scheme. The very next day, the True North Brewery went into administration and the administrators sold the business to Cocktails and Craft Beers. So obviously we need to do due diligence. I wondered if there was any report back from officers, any update on that, or whether we need to revisit that decision based on the turn of events.
I wasn't aware of those changes, but I'll get the relevant officers to look into that and report back.
Thank you for that, Councillor Elliott. Can I ask people to approve the minutes as a correct record? Yep, thank you. Item 5, public questions and petitions. We have received 7 questions from 1 member of the public and no petition for today's meeting. Can I ask Mr. Hodgson to come forward and ask your questions, please? And if you can ask all your questions and then I'll On to all of them, thank you.
Hi, am I making, yes I am, right, okay. So, in the report made by the Head of Property Services to your committee on the 1st of August about the proposal to lease a section of Millhouses Park to True North Bruco, as mentioned by Councillor Elliott, various reasons are advanced to justify the recommendation to approve the lease, reasons presumably endorsed by your committee in doing so. Although in the decisions document, as mentioned by Councillor Elliott, the lessee is now stated to be KS Yeardley FCB Limited Pension Scheme instead of True North Bruco. So, I would like to question those reasons and your presumed endorsement of them. So, question 1. How can the Wagon and Horses pub seating area or beer garden continue to be within the park, as mentioned in paragraph 2.2 of the report, while it is under the control of and leased to the public house? Question 2. The report, in paragraph 2.2 also, describes the provision of a second refreshment offer as desirable, as the area around the park is not well served by cafe offers. So does the committee agree that this is scarcely compatible with the fact that within 2 to 3 minutes walk from the north end of the park, within the Millhouses shopping area, are 2 more pubs, 2 restaurants, 4 cafes, a fish and chip shop and 2 takeaways. Plus there is a cafe opposite the park on Terminus Road, and there are also 3 supermarkets, 2 of them also with cafes, within easy walking distance of the park. Question 3. The suggestion in the report, paragraph 2.3, is that future income via other and competing businesses in the park will increase. Our understanding is that this will happen via rent increases for the park cafe and the ice cream van. Does the committee agree that if true, such rent increases could just as easily result in those businesses closing down, which would mean a loss of income for Park and Countryside Service and or a poorer offer for park users, and this would also reduce the value for money benefits to the council? So, question 4. Paragraph 2.4 suggests the lease process conforms to the principles and requirements of the Building Better Park strategy. In view of the following aspects, mostly noted in the report, first of all, the 2-year history of the negotiations described as protracted, convoluted and difficult, also mentioned in the decision. The repeated violation of the terms of the 3 tenancy will agreements by True North Bruco, mentioned in the report, paragraphs 1.5 to 1.55 to 1.58. The recently publicised financial problems and other management changes experienced by True North Bruco, as mentioned by Councillor Elliott, published in the Star on the 2nd of August and in the Sheffield Tribune on the 7th of August. And the acknowledged threat of legal action by TNB against the council during the negotiations. So, taking those into account, how does your lease approval conform with the following criteria from the council's Building Better Park strategy? A, the council maintaining policy and asset control. B, supporting external partners needing to be aligned to the council's priorities and values. And C, potential partners to be viable and sustainable. That last one obviously has relevance to the changes in True North Bruco. Question 5. Does the proposed reconciliation of monies owed and the set-off against the back rent to be collected mean that TMB will in fact only have had 1 year rent-free, as against the 18 months mentioned in a previous response from Parks and Countryside Service? And paragraph 4.3.3, dealing with possible termination of the lease, does that mean that the council will only agree the lease subject to the lessee agreeing to contract out of the provisions of the Landlord and Tenant Act 1954? And does the lease contain terms guaranteeing that the council can regain control over the land leased if it decides not to renew the lease at the end of the term set? Both the terms of the lease and including terms for ending the lease are redacted from the report, but presumably have been seen by your committee. And question 7, How does your committee suggest the council does its due diligence in relation to the lessee now not being True North Bruco, as stated in the report, but the KS Yeardley, etc. pension scheme, as stated in the decisions publication, again referencing Councillor Elliott's question? So, now can I just say one thing, if that's allowable, so as a sort of follow-up? Is that okay, Chair?
Yep, that's fine.
Thank you. Right. I realise that you may not be able to give me answers to all these questions now. I realise that there are facts there to be checked and you will want to discuss maybe some of the conclusions that I am asking you to draw. However, what I would like to ask is that the committee accept that, taking into account that if the facts that I have laid out are true and some of the inferences that I have drawn possibly from them, then could the committee agree that this raises serious questions about the validity of the decision made on the 1st of August? Now that, I think, could be answered now. You may disagree. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson, and thank you for your questions. In regards to question 1, the area will be subjected to a lease and remains within the boundary of the park. The ownership remains with the City Council. This is the same arrangement for cafes within parks, including the one at Millhouses. In response to question 2, Millhouses Park is a large city park, and it is the council's view that the addition of the seating area will offer park visitors further refreshment options. Paragraph 2.3 state, it is clear that the introduction of this second refreshment facility has and will continue to reduce income that is generated through other partners in the park. We anticipate this potentially being a short-term impact with future agreements, increasing income reflecting the significant use and opportunity in Millhouses Park. The park is a popular destination and we believe that it can incorporate a range of offers which are offered at market rent. In regards to question 4, does your lease approval conform with the following criteria from Council's Building Better Park strategy? Yes, we believe so. Paragraph 4.2, question number 5. Paragraph 4.23 states a 12-month rent-free period has been agreed in recognition of the capital expenditure on the site, but as no rent has yet been collected for the periods of occupancy and trading to date, there will need to be a reconciliation of money owed and set off against this sum. Question 6. Yes, the purpose of contracting a lease out of the terms of the 1954 Act is to ensure that the tenant at the expiry of the contractual term does not have any rights to stay in occupation, nor would the council need a reason to regain possession of the leased area. Question number 7, the response, due diligence on KS Yardley FCB Limited Pension Scheme and its covenant strength will be undertaken prior to the entering to any lease. This is standard practice with all lease arrangements. So that answers your question, Councillor Elliott, as well. And thank you, Mr. Hodson, for your questions. Moving on to members' questions. No questions have been submitted by members in advance of the meeting. Items number 7, work programme. You can find this on page 17 of the agenda pack. Rachel Appleyard will give us an update on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the work programme update, it sets out all known agenda items for forthcoming meetings of this committee. There have been 4 additions and 2 changes since the last meeting, and these are outlined in Appendix 1, which is on page 18 of the pack. From page 19 onwards, you can see the details of items due at forthcoming meetings, and I'll hand over to officers to answer any questions. Thank you.
Is there any questions? No, the report contains recommendations for approval. Are we all agreed? Yep. Thank you, that's unanimous. Item number 8, Q1 budget monitoring. This is on the page 33 of the agenda pack, and presenting officer will be Philip, Gregory and Jane Willoughby. Thank you, over to you. Oh, and Damien as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. This report is the first budget monitoring report of 23-24 financial year and reports to the committee the overall financial position of the council at the end of July. This is a forecast overspend of £17.6 million, which is a 3.6% variance on the total budget of £487 million. The council set aside £70 million in reserves to support a financially sustainable position. That was in 21-22, of which £30 million remains. If the overspend doesn't improve by year end, that will result in £13 million being left in this reserve for future years. There are, as the report sets out, a number of cost and demand pressures that contribute to the forecast position over and above the position from when the budget was set. Key drivers within that forecast are the cost of care packages and placements and the demand for those placements and packages within children's and adult social care. The demand for those placements continues to increase at some unsustainable rates. Now, this is a problem that's faced across the country. It's not isolated to Sheffield, and services are working hard in collaboration with finance and procurement colleagues to mitigate these overspends. Home to school transport is also in record demand and is significantly overspent this year. The other major contributing factor to the overspend position is the cost to the council of temporary and supported accommodation, which is provided to some of our most vulnerable residents. The council is unable to reclaim the full cost of this accommodation from the Department for Work and Pensions through housing benefits, and that creates an £8.5 million pressure within this financial year. Within the £17.6 million forecast overspend, there are £10.6 million of agreed savings that have been assessed as undeliverable. The current delivery rate for this financial year is 78%, which is an improvement on the 65% that was delivered last year, but we need to remain focused on recommending budget improvement plans or savings with a high probability of delivery. The report also includes 3 appendices. The first is the capital programme monitoring. This shows an underspend of £32.1 million against a budget of £292 million. Key variations include the housing stock increase and external insulation schemes, with smaller variations in transport, regeneration and climate change schemes and schemes within adults' health and social care. The second appendix to the report is the quarterly Treasury Management update. This sets out that there is a better than budget return from Treasury Management in Q1, and that's £2.6 million. The Council currently uses its internal resources to fund capital expenditure, reducing the need to borrow externally, which has isolated the Council from many of the interest fluctuations that we've seen in the markets. The forecast expenditure is within the limits approved by Council at budget setting in March earlier this year. The third appendix then sets out the collection fund forecast at Q1. This shows that the collection of council tax and business rates is slightly ahead of target, with a forecast surplus of £1.8 million. Now, the way the collection fund is accounted for means that any surplus will credit the 24-25 budget rather than this year, but it's a positive position. The majority of the benefit on business rates relates to an improvement in the collection of previous year's outstanding balances, which reduces the need for the council to hold a bad debt provision. It's worth noting the council is the collection agent for business rates. The rates that local businesses pay are set by central government and collected by the council. So this summarises the content of the Q1 report. There's far more detail in there on each of the service committees and the variances within those. Those variances will each be presented to each of the committees over the next few weeks. We're happy to take any questions that members may have, although there is a proposed budget environment which we'll be asking you to approve, which David Hollis can take you through the detail of.
Thank you. Yes. At its budget meeting in March, full council resolved that as part of an amendment that alongside service redesign additional spending amounting to £25,000 per ward, overseen by ward councillors and delivered through the local area committees process, is provided as an additional spend for 23-24. However, the spending proposals set out in the related revenue budget were ward pots, 25k per ward being £700,000. The intention behind the amendment was that the budget was allocated to LACs, so that the LACs could make decisions as to expenditure through community plan priorities in accordance with their terms of reference as set out in the Constitution. Ward pots are administered by the LAC team, but are not subject to LAC decision making. The decision maker is the head of service on behalf of the Director of Communities, in close consultation with ward members, who thus have oversight. In order to give effect to the budget resolution as intended, Finance Committee is asked to agree the virement of £700,000 from the ward pot budget to the local area committee budget to be distributed as £100,000 per LAC. The reason we're asking you to do this as urgent is so that decisions can be made as soon as possible by the LACs on spending this money.
Just to make it clear, so what you're saying, the budgets will be treated as LAC funding or as ward pot?
As LAC funding. So that was the original intention of the amendment, but the budget reflected it as ward pot money. So this, in a way, is just a technical amendment, so moving the virement of the £700,000 from ward pot into LACs.
Thank you, because that's what I thought we were agreeing. Because this was just for colleagues, this was agreement when we thought that all three budget amendments were going to fall, and the three leaders then came together and said, well, we need to make sure that LACs and get the money. So yeah, thank you for that clarification.
Can I also ask clarity regarding this? So even though it'll be LAC funding now and there'll be 100k per LAC, can you just clarify what that means for each ward?
That's a matter that needs to be clarified. The original budget amendment can be read either as 25k per LAC, per ward, that is an amount that is then spent by the LAC, which is 100k per LAC, or it could be read as being ring-fenced to be spent within each ward. And that clarity may be needed further. But if we can get that clarity sooner, then this virement will allow the LACs to start making those decisions.
Okay, just before I bring Councillor Lee in, I thought it was 25k per ward that we had agreed, overseen by councillors. Councillor Lee, you might know a bit more than I do.
Okay, so my understanding is that the 100,000 is for LAC priorities that were set out when we did the consultation with the public when LACs commenced, and that was a big piece of work that was carried out, and a number of priorities that the public identified were put back to the public. The LAC spend, which is 100k, is to be for those priorities. However, we're saying in this amendment, we're saying now that that is the case. However, we need to spend 25k in each ward, rather than maybe on projects that span 2 wards, or maybe needed in 1 ward but not another. Does that make sense?
As part of this, I'm not saying either of those. The original motion was a cross-party motion, amendment. It was a cross-party amendment, and the clarity of whether it was 25k per ward or whether it's 100k per LAC for ring-fenced into a ward, I think isn't 100% clear from the wording of the amendment. And it's a matter of full council as to what was intended. It's not something for me to determine.
Councillor Chapman, is your question relating to the lack? Oh, so can I bring you in after, because I know you put your hand up first. So Councillor Sangha.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks to David for bringing this as an urgent item. I mean, clearly, myself and Mary, as LAC chairs, are very keen that this is resolved. I think my first thing I would say to regular members of the Finance Committee is it's really important that for next year we get this resolved before we start writing budget amendments. That what happened, for those of you who recall, is that we put this amendment, a cross-party amendment, in at the end, feeling that we were not going to have any of this money. So very grateful for colleagues across political parties that we got that agreed. However, in the rush, the wording was not up to the standards it would have been of an amendment that would have gone through the process, and we therefore have got this delay where clearly the three main political parties have got slightly different interpretations on how what the words mean, and it's not been possible to resolve that. Obviously, speaking as a LAC chair, I'm very keen to go to my next public meeting and say this is what was agreed in March. These are the priorities that we've established over the last 18 months. This is a proposal for spending that, and clearly all we want to spend across the 4 wards, but equally many of us would rather have projects that went across the wards. And we've already had public questions from Millhouses Park, which is a park which is on the edge of a ward. Clearly spending in that ward would be spending Millhouses Park is one of those issues where we like to have colleagues, and we have other parks where the ward boundaries go through the parks. So I think what I've heard from David in terms of the response was that it's a LAC decision, so it's not the 3 members per ward to spend 25,000. It's the 12 members across the LAC to decide how this 4 lots of 25 or 4 lots of 25,000 are spent, and I will certainly be hoping that colleagues in my LAC are able to continue to support projects we've had across the LAC, because that's much easier in terms of accounting, and it allows us to have larger projects. And my real worry about projects just being in one ward is that they're limited in scope, and I just think particularly if you've got a park that crosses wards, and some parks even cross LAC boundaries, so I just think it will make it easier to have cross-ward spending, if that's the flexibility that we can establish with a further conversation. And I think that's what Councillor Lee has said, so I think myself and Councillor Lee are in agreement. It's just getting the other 82 councillors to agree that position might be a bit harder. We'll do what we can. I'm really pleased that we're making progress on this, but really want a clear position to explain when I'm chairing a public meeting of how this money can be spent and how it can be accounted for, because there are projects that are waiting to be implemented, and so yeah, it has been a delay, but I'm glad we're making progress. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I mean, there's nothing that if it goes in as LAC funding, there's nothing to stop LACs and different wards pooling that money to use on one big project. But what we don't want to say, perhaps, that 3 members shouldn't have a say on how the 25,000 gets spent.
Yeah, Councillor Sangar is right, in that the decision of how this is spent is across the 12 members of the LAC, collectively, just using normal principles. It's not a ward decision. The one issue is whether that decision has to require £25,000 worth of spending within each ward. That seems to be the one thing that is outstanding.
Councillor Elliott.
I think I was just going to echo what you were saying, Councillor Naz, in that certainly our discussions in the South LAC were to establish if there were any sort of strategic aims across the LAC that all 12 members agreed on, in which case we would spend the money in that way, but not to preclude us just spending 25 in each ward if that's what we saw would be, a better outcome. So we were sort of you know, just discussing it amongst the 12 of us to see what would work best. But there wasn't anything prescriptive in that to say that we could not just split it per ward if we wanted to. Does that make sense?
I think the question is whether the LACs are bound by the resolution of full council to spend 25k within each ward. And then that seems to be the outstanding issue.
I think, Chair, to be honest with you, I think what I've heard from Mary, Andy and Mary-Anne is that it's a decision for the LACs. You know, the budget gave 100,000 for each of the LACs. And if the LACs choose to spend 25 per ward and split it, that's fine by me, as long as the members agree. But as we're just talking off the record here, Encliffe Park, part of it is in my ward, part of it's Andrew's ward, part's in Broom Hill. Some of it's in South West Lac, some of it's in Central Lac. I'm sure there'll be other examples of that. That's when things get complicated, and I think rather than trying to deal with it from the centre, if we just delegate, because that's what LACs are about, delegate the money down and let the decisions be made locally because they know best, I would say.
Yeah.
And if that is the way that people want to interpret that, and that is a consistent interpretation that all the groups and parties agree with, then that is fine. As I say, it's whether there are some members who feel that it's otherwise, and Finance Committee can't itself change the resolution. So as long as all groups and members are agreed that that is the way it should be interpreted, then that will be fine.
So just for clarity, what we're saying is it's the money will come out the ward pots, go into the LACs as 100k per LAC, and it'll be a decision made by 12 ward councillors. So if there were 3 ward councillors, David, who wanted to use a 25 in their ward, that would still be okay to do that if that's what the LAC agreed? Yeah? Yeah. So that's fine. So it doesn't really then need to go to the full council. No. I think most of us... Yeah. Because I agree with Councillor Sangha, that would delay then the projects and things that are already coming up. Councillor Chaplin?
Yeah. Oh, thought I was in. Just to clarify, this money hasn't been allocated yet, so the decision here will then allocate the money. It's not sitting in ward pots at the moment, is it?
It's not been spent within ward pots. Technically, it's allocated to ward pots, but the environment, the technical decision today, will move it into like spending.
Just wanted to be clear that there'd be no wards that have already started dipping into it. Yeah, thank you.
So are we all right with that, David? Okay, thank you. Councillor Mallison?
Yeah, just thinking of the future, so if there was a LAC where the members couldn't resolve matters, there may need to be some consideration amongst the political parties of how that can be escalated and resolved. That's all.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Lee?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Councillor Sank said. We really need to get this sorted for next year so that we LACs are very clear about what they've got, what their priorities might be, whether we want to refresh them or not, and we can then get on with spending as early as possible rather than, you know, at this point during the year. Because I know I'm sure every LAC has got projects coming through and people are asking about what they want to do. And that spend can be flexible across wards or for each ward. But, you know, there's parks that span wards. There's also children that span 2 wards as well, you know, where you might want to put some spend into a project where two lots of kids from 2 different wards. Children don't see ward divisions, do they? You know, we need to ensure that we can do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think some of the concerns were that the decision wasn't just made by officers or the chair. You know, everybody on the LAC all members from the LAC had a say in how that money was spent. David?
I was just going to say I agree with what Councillor Sangar and Councillor Lee said, I think, just to put some context and to be fair, this was, as being mentioned, I think it was technically a fifth amendment because we'd had Councillor Chinchin put forward an amendment as well, and I believe he was also involved in drafting this. So it was something done as a consequence of the other amendments not getting through, done at short notice. I don't think people intended that it would be unable to be interpreted or different interpretations as it went along. I think it's just one of those things that's the way it's ended up. And so we're just seeking to clarify that and make sure that there is a consistent approach to how LACs deal with this money.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, I don't know whether I put my hand up a bit early. Are we going to have a Treasury report?
Yeah, we're going to get to it.
All right, then I'll wait for that then.
Once I think we've agreed this, haven't we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Philip, for the Q1 budget. Over to Damien and Jane.
No, sorry. I think what Councillor Chapman was saying is, can we now ask questions, budget questions, rather than just LAC questions?
We've agreed so we're done.
Sorry, yeah, we've spoken about the LAC. You can ask your question now.
Right, get that back. On the Treasury report, on page 71, paragraph 2.1, it talks about substantial proportion of our own liquidity for capital expenditure rather than taking external borrowing due to high interest rates. I wonder what level interest rates would have to fall to before we go back to external borrowing.
That's a good question. I think we'll wait and see what the forecasts look like and how quickly they come down and where they're going to stabilise. I think at the moment we don't need to borrow externally, and so we'll continue to use those internal funds. Historically, interest rates have been very low. I think it's unlikely they're going to fall back to those historic lows. You can see there is a forecast in there from our Treasury advisors as to what they think interest rates will fall to. I think we expect them to tend towards a 2% interest rate potentially, but that might take a few years to get to. I think we'll need to borrow before we get to that point, and it might mean that in the past where we would have looked to take long-term borrowing straight away, we may look to take short-term borrowing to bridge that time period before rates have stabilised at a lower rate, which is what we expect to happen.
Okay.
Councillor Mohammed?
Thank you, Chair. Mine spans a number of pages around housing, 48, 49. In essence, it's just flagging up the ongoing concerns that we've had around trying to get on top of the voids, and in particular, what it's costing us. I mean, I think there's a question to Councillor Douglas about how much it's cost in loss of rent. It's £400,000, and council tax it's been 117,000 just in Q1. And I know you talk about establishing a team, etc., but we've been talking about trying to sort this out for a number of years, and it's just costing us. And the ultimate cost is lack of investment, because every time we overspend on housing, the place we go to is capital, and it is having a knock-on effect long-term for the council's housing stock of current housing, not getting the capital investment it desperately needs.
Yeah, I agree. Those voids create also a revenue impact, where actually we'd prefer to have the rent than sat void. There is a working party that's been set up to address this. Officers are tasked with making improvements quickly. We are committed to that and want to see some improvement in that. It is a big issue, and it will reflect again in those amounts that we could claim back from DWP, or we can't claim back from DWP being reduced if we can actually put people in the properties that we own, which are at the moment void.
Councillor Sangha?
Yes, Chair, I've got a number of questions. I don't know if you want to do it more in one go, but let's just start with electric works on page 54, because clearly last year officers flagged up that we were struggling to meet the 85% occupancy, and we've obviously really struggling this year. And just wondering what options we have for the building, or is there a working group or are there going to be a list of options? We can't carry on just failing to rent out parts of this building year after year and you're missing the income target. So just wanting to know what's the strategy and when it's going to be reported back to members. Thanks, Chair.
I'll give you a brief introduction and maybe Jane can give you some better detail than I can. So I understand that there were some onerous terms and conditions on who could occupy electric works. Members asked for those to be lifted and they have been. We're waiting to see the impact of that. Jane will correct me if I'm wrong, I think.
No, that's correct. I think we've just had issues in terms of getting the tenants back in. We've then lost other tenants in that building, so that's reflected in the current forecast. There's it's been actively marketed and we're hoping to get further tenants in, but in terms of a working group to look at future options around that building, I'm sure that that's something that officers will be looking at.
So thanks for that. So what sort of timescale are you expecting improvements on this figure, or for other options to be brought to the table? Because if the issue was restrictions on who tenants could be, and members have lifted that, I mean, that's clearly an obvious thing to do, but just want to know the timescale, because I'm just concerned we're going to continue to miss this income target. So I'd like to know sort of, are we talking 3 months, 6 months, 12 months before something's going to be done on this?
So, I mean, I think Jane set out, we are taking action, but how quickly that results in an actual tenancy is difficult for us to sort of predetermine. I would hope that it's sooner rather than later, but the forecast indicates our best expectation at the moment, which is that it remains vacant. But yes, the sooner we can let those buildings, the better.
Okay, thanks for that. Different subject of housing benefit, and this is much more difficult to understand what we can do. I mean, clearly the government could change the regulations, the government could change the subsidies, but this is the need to find supported accommodation for some of the most vulnerable people in Sheffield, and clearly we thought we'd got a strategy, and you know, we're already forecasting £3.5 million out, unless we do something about it. I mean, what can be done, given that this is very much a demand-led service, and very much this is an increase that we did not predict. What else can be done, given that this is a service that these vulnerable people do need?
So as part of the work that's looking at the overall housing issues, particularly around voids, we are looking at what properties we do own and whether we can repurpose those to be suitable for those needs of those tenants. We recognise that bed and breakfast accommodation, for example, is often not the most appropriate. In fact, in the vast majority of cases, it's probably not the most appropriate accommodation for people who are, in many cases, quite vulnerable. And so we want to find the right solution. It does mean, though, that we need to look at what property we own, what we can repurpose, and what we can use effectively. That will also be impacted by the number of voids that we hold. It's no quick fix, unfortunately, for this. Again, in terms of your right, government could make a policy change, which would immediately change the position. The national picture is also that many other councils are in a similar position to us, where they are facing similar budget pressures as a result of this policy. And for many councils, they're in a similar position where that's multiple millions of pounds pressure falling on the council to fund as a failure of this policy. So we need to address our housing provision in order to be able to provide the right level of accommodation for those residents.
Yeah, no, I understood this is a difficult one. I'd say it's difficult to come up with a quick fix on that. Can you just move on to Education, Children and Families Committee? And clearly it's for them to get a grip on this, but a 46% delivery rate on BIPs is not what I'd expect at a 3-month point. So I don't know how many times I've read about the challenge of placement costs in terms of page 47. I really want to ask, in terms of the home to school transport, it's saying an overarching review next year. When was the last overarching review of transport services? When was the previous to the last overarching review? And were the recommendations of the previous reviews all carried out? Philip, this is not the first time I've seen a predicted overspend on home to school transport budget, and I guess it probably won't be the last time, but I'm just deeply concerned that this committee has got a really challenging task with its budget, but it's off to not off to a stellar start after 3 months. Thanks, Chair.
education and children's budgets are really challenging. Placement costs can be very expensive. The average cost that's set out here is £5,400 a week. Some placements are multiple times that. There is a supply issue across all elements of children's placements, which is, again, a national problem. There aren't enough placements nationally for children who have additional needs and require that extra level of support. And some of the most complex needs are some of the placements which are most impacted by that lack of supply, which means that inevitably, because there's a lack of supply, costs go up, and then there's competition for placements, and that just drives costs further and further up. So there is a national perspective to this. We're not isolated in facing these issues. However, you do point out that home to school transport is a particular issue that we need to fix. The Director of Children's Services is conducting a review. I'll take the question and find out when the last one was reviewed and what the implications and recommendations from that would have been and whether they've been implemented. The new director is keen to make improvements in her service.
Thanks for that. I mean, clearly the issue about cost of placings has been an issue for many, many years, and it's a challenge, and fully accept this constant challenge to get new foster carers, but also other more specialist providers of places. Understand that's going on, but that's not unique to Sheffield. And I just think I think what members want is some clarity that the service is doing what they can on that. I think on transport, I am very concerned that this should not be an area where the overspend is on home to school transport. I mean, there are plenty more difficult lines in the education, children and families budget than the home to school transport, and I just feel that previous reviews have not been properly implemented. So I would hope that the new executive director takes those thoughts on board, and that the members of the Education, Children and Families Committee understand the challenge and make the change, help managers make the changes necessary to get this budget back online. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Similar thoughts myself, really. Last year when I sat on the Children's Committee and for the first couple of sessions, committee meetings on adult care, and there was a very, very strong message to those committees that they needed to get their budget in order and deliver on the targets that were set for them, and I hope that message has gone out this year as well. And in terms of just one specific, and I don't know how you can answer this one, but maybe we could take it back to the committee and let them give it some thoughts. It's about those children who are placed out of city with very complex needs and very high costs. And I'd like to know, are those services, those providers, actually providing what they say they will provide? The assessments, I assume, are done by our social workers who say this is what this child needs, and then they provide and say, yes, we can do that. Well, we need to make sure they are delivering, because for the needs of that child in what they say they will deliver. And then the other question is, when are we going to bring those children back into city? Because that seems to me fundamental, that children should stay in the city they were born in, where their networks are, family, friends and so on. And I think that's really, really important. We've said it over and over again in terms of adults with learning disabilities, that they need to be absolutely brought back into the city. Big drives towards that, and I hope that continues, but also children as well. So that's the message I would send back to children's. And all the things Andrew has mentioned about transport, it does need to be in order. And the more general question I had was, how do we compare to other cities, given what's happened in Birmingham? Where is Sheffield placed? Have you any idea about that?
Thank you. So, in terms of children, Councillor Dale provided an update at Strategy and Resources Committee on the progress of her committee in terms of delivering against their budget and the challenges they face. I think the Children's Service are looking at creative ways of creating capacity to bring some of those children back to the city, and so that the distance in placements can be reduced. That work is ongoing, and some of that is again linked to the housing issues and making sure we can place people in the right places that are suitable for their needs. So remind me of the final part of your question.
It was about out-of-city placements and how they deliver in the services that they said and are being paid to deliver to those individual children. That was one question. But then, are we making strides to bring those children back, which you've answered? But also then, how does Sheffield compare to other core cities?
I was going to come in at the end to ask a further question. Can I just add to Mary's question? Basically, Birmingham's been balancing its budget by reserves similar to us, and they've got a big overspend, not as big. We've not got as big a spend as them, or overspend at the moment. So just to follow up Mary's question, how far are we off from getting into the very difficult situation that Birmingham are in? Would be a genuine question that most Sheffielders will want answering, and myself and Councillor Lee, and I suspect rest of the committee.
So it's probably easier to compare percentages. I'm hoping that Jane has the spreadsheet because I can't get into it at the moment. She'll frantically look for it now. So our overspend is 3.6%. I think I've said in the Statutory Resources Committee that, you know, below 5% is reasonable performance. Obviously, we're not satisfied with an overspend as it is, and we'll target pushing that further and further down. We have got a comparison against the reported position of other core cities, which we could potentially share with the committee against their published reports and what their forecast outturn position is. We are in the pack of what those positions are. So Birmingham is the highest, as you might expect. I think in terms of the position at Birmingham in comparison to ours, Birmingham has some unique issues. It has the costs related to the implementation of its finance and HR system, which are multiple times what they expected it to be, in the region of £100 million now for that system. And then also Birmingham have the fair pay issue that they're dealing with, that they haven't dealt with in the past, and that is resulting in them incurring additional costs each and every month, that position isn't resolved. We aren't in that position. And so as a result, if we can manage the budgets that we've set, and we can fix some of those sustainability issues where we can set a sustainable budget, I think that's where we need to be. So I think the report sets out, you know, in terms of deliverability of savings and deliverability of the core financial position, you know, there are one-off items within the forecast at the moment. Actually, the core budget issues are about £22 million. If we can address those, that puts us in a really good position for future years. And that's what our focus has to be. It's any budget implementation plans, any investment into services in terms of budget growth, or invest to save plans has to target those core budget issues. Jane, do you have the comparison?
Unfortunately, the Wi-Fi is not working in here, so I can't access the spreadsheet. But I can, yeah, of course. I think when we did look, the Birmingham overspend is looking for the first quarter at about 90 million against budget. And lots of that, as Philip had said, is to do with other one-off issues like the system implementation issue and some equal pay claims. A lot of that's coming from reserves. But there are underlying social care problems across the board, particularly in children's. When we've benchmarked against other core cities, we've seen in Leeds, Nottingham and Bristol, you know, similar issues with children's social care. So, you know, in terms of benchmarking, we're not unique in the pressures that we face. I think the percentages was over the 5% mark against Birmingham's net budget. Our current variance is looking at about 3.6 at the moment, but we'll share the spreadsheet. It's quite interesting.
Thank you. Councillor Mallison?
Yeah, it's just a small point, really, and it's, I apologise if we have been told and I haven't taken it in, but just on the school transport, 3 million, obviously overspend is a huge amount of money for just one relatively small item, I'd have thought. What is the reason for that 3 million overspend? What's caused the school transport to balloon so much?
I think it's been a combination of increased demand and increased cost over a number of years, and a static budget, really. We've not seen an increase in budget, really, and it's just increased number of children that require home to school transport as part of their plan. Generally, I think the review work that's going to be taking place is going to look at the appropriateness of some of those, and also, you know, location of placements. That has a lot to do with it. So I I think it's a combination of factors really, but the demand is really driving the cost.
So we're talking about special needs transport mainly, but do we still do Catholic transport, or is that something of the past? Or was that ever part of it?
Bus passes are gone.
That's gone. Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you. There isn't any further questions or comments, so thank you very much for presenting the Q1 budget. This report does contain recommendations for approval. Are we all agreed? Yeah, that's all agreed. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item, which is on item 9, page 83 of the agenda pack, and the presenting officer is Damien. So over to you.
Hi, I'm Damien Watkinson. I'm the Finance Manager in the Capital team. I'm here to present the changes to the capital programme that come forward in the month 4 cycle. This includes amendments to the budgets, the capital budgets, also the making of a grant to a third party, which is subject to a final legal confirmation of a subsidy control position, and the approval of an accepting a grant, which is a confidential appendix because government need us to accept the funding, but they're currently embargoing the release of the information regarding that. So I'll start with the Appendix 1, which covers the changes to the budgets. The first, under Transport, Regeneration and Climate Change, we've got £1.6 million of levelling up funding, which is proposed to be distributed to the Harmony Works as part of their bid to secure Canada House as premises for a new music hub in Sheffield. It's just one strand of the funding that they're looking to pull together to be able to purchase the building and develop the hub. We will only release our funding when they've secured the remainder of theirs. So Appendix 2 is the relating grant to issue to that particular body, and again, like I said, that is just subject to final confirmation of a subsidy control position. So there's a request here to delegate that final signing of the agreement to the Director of Transport and Regeneration. We've got 2 pedestrian crossings in the Crooks area come forward, which is following on from the active travel neighbourhoods that's been active in that area. There's also road safety works on the A625. We've received funding from government, so we're doing feasibility works on the A625. There's a total grant being made of approximately 1.4 million. We're spending approximately 100 now, sorting out what the interventions are going to be, and then you'll subsequently see the approval for that spend coming forward at later meetings. We're putting in also the budget from the Road Safety Fund and Local Transport Plan funding for a rolling programme of small-scale highways improvements. It's badged up as the Streets Head Opportunities programme. That includes this time 285k for works that are going to be commissioned solely by the local area committees. So each LAC area will have a budget where it can allocate works to this particular programme. Under Community Parks and Leisure, we're doing feasibility works at Millhouses Park around the installation of an accessible toilet there. We've received grant funding for that, but this is the first stage of establishing the appropriate site and implementation of that. Last month, this committee saw a decision around approving the acceptance of some youth investment funding if it were to be granted. We've had email confirmation of that. We're just awaiting the formal documentations to come through. There's tight timescales on this, so as a result, we've brought forward two of the major schemes for approval of the budgets, 1.5 million at Stocksbridge and 640k at All Saints Youth Clubs. So those schemes will start to go out to tender, but we won't be issuing any contracts until we've had the formal documentation through regarding the grant. Under housing, we're doing some feasibility work on the Newstead site, which had started to be developed for general needs and older person independent living spaces. It might be the case that this scheme has to be paused. and as such, we're doing some feasibility work around making that site safe and accessible again until the development recommences. So there's 37k being put aside for that. We're looking at putting £2 million into the Gleadless Valley Master Plan Acquisitions programme, looking to acquire properties in that area to allow the redevelopment in line with the master plan, which will allow us to either demolish that housing if required, or it will allow us to move residents around the area in order to be able to allow the development to proceed. So this is putting a budget of £2 million in place so that those acquisitions can then move ahead. Under education, children and families, we're doing some feasibility work on a SEND integrated resource at Broomhill Nursery School. That's part of the overall strategy for special educational needs in the city, and some of that ties back to some of the questions you're asking earlier about transport. The strategy, the capital strategy for special educational needs is to put more resources into localities. So it's like putting, you might have seen them on these papers on the past few months, integrated resources like say Stannington, Malin Bridge. So the capital funding coming forward to try and make sure we can accommodate children close to their homes and have the appropriate resources there. So this is another example of one of those coming through. We've got the confirmation of budgets of 1.4 million and 1.2 million for expansions at Warncliffe Side Primary School and Manor Lodge Primary School respectively, due to localised pressure in these areas due to housing developments. Overall, primary roles have been falling, but in these areas we're seeing growth. And again, it's about making sure we're providing the places where the children are actually located rather than having to travel. We've seen an increase in the cost of 550k at Nethergreen School, where their roof is being replaced. That's taking the cost of that up to around 2.2 million now. It's just showing us the difficulties we're seeing across the school estate, you know, regardless of other issues that have been in the news domain. That when you work on listed buildings and you take those roofs off, you sometimes don't know what you're going to find in there. And obviously costs are increasing, you know, the inflation across the capital area. And then finally, under economic development and skills, we have the Tinsley Art Project. So this has been running for a while, looking at putting a piece of public art around Tinsley. And the design's been finalised now with the artist, and it's looking to be an artistic canal boat which will be moored in Tinsley Marina. So that we're increasing the budget by 320k in order to be able to deliver that design. That, I believe, is a quick whistle stop to one of those. Like I said, the other items being the making of the grant and the accepting of the funding that's embargoed.
Thank you, Damien. Councillor Mohammed.
A couple of points. Welcome the youth investment funding. I mean, I know these two youth centres, in particular Stocksbridge, is a really well-used youth centre that Kevin Seaman used to run really well and desperate need of, you know, upgrading. So that's fantastic news. I just want to pick up the point around the last point, actually, the increase of £320,000 on the art project. It's been ongoing. It's been quite a long thing. It's moved around a bit. I just want to say, Chair, I feel, although I want it to happen, I just want something to be done. For this project to now increase to nearly £800,000 is a lot of money. And the genuine question, what else could we have done with 320,000? I hope they do not come back for any more money, because this will become like the shipping containers where we just have to say no if they ever try coming back again.
Well, I mean, I've just said that the funding for this has come through specific agreements, so it's not been actually any of the authorities' sort of own resources that's gone into it. It has come from funding agreements from British Land and Section 106 agreements that were brought for public art. So it's not that, you know, the funding we've received could have been used for anything else, you know, technically.
I would challenge that, you know, 106, there is a bit of flexibility. I don't think 106 is that tied down that you only have to spend it on the art. that?
Yeah, yes, so public art, it was specified in the agreements.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman?
To provide 80 new integrated places, and it is a double of placements across the city. We welcome this. Are there any other IR projects in the pipeline?
Yeah, it's certainly part of the strategy. I'm trying to recall if I've got any coming through this month, but I'll go back and check the records because there will be business cases for that coming through. So yeah, it's part of this, the plan coming through, definitely. So yeah, I'll go back, Councillor, and I'll find out which ones we've got that we're aware of that are due to come forward.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Sangar?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, clearly, in terms of the streets ahead, in terms of page 93, very much welcome. LAC's having an influence in terms of more of the capital budget for transports. A welcome start, but it's just a start. But yes, happy for that. There's a lot of projects which LAC members would like to pursue, and there's always a balance between what we do locally versus citywide, but I accept this is a good start. And just in terms of page 107 and Evergreen School, this is clearly a traditional built school. I mean, I remember when my kids attended that school 20 years ago. They celebrated the centenary, so this is a very traditional built school. So it's not the current materials issues. So is this extra £500,000? Is it because things have been found because the roof was, as I say, decades and decades old, so more things are found, or is it the construction inflation that we're facing across the council, across the country? So it's trying to understand that balance, how much of this is construction inflation and how much of it is, as I say, more things being found because this school, along with many other primary schools across Sheffield, has been underinvested over the years, and therefore when we finally get to do a project, we end up finding we need to do more than we originally planned. But clearly I very much welcome the money going there. I'm very pleased it's happening at last. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, I think I tried to spell it out in the report. Just say sort of like 145k was on like this ceiling level insulation removal that's had to be done. Then the time extends. So once the time extends, the contract's on site longer. There's 60k there. So we increased contingencies as well. And then the 179k that's there about the other essential works effectively that became apparent once they started unearthing works. So I think it's a mixture of the two really, because once you identify the additional works, they're outside the original tender costs, so they're then subject to the inflation. So that's the difficulty we're in on that one.
I'll just to make the point for those who don't know the building, scaffolding's been there for a long time, and work at height is that much more expensive than work on ground level. So just keen for it to happen, but keen for the project to finish on time, and the kids can get back to a school without scaffolding and workmen there all the time. But thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mallison?
It's just coming back to the artwork at Tinsley. I'm just curious, obviously it's a canal boat. Is it going to be in any way, do you know if it's going to be in any way interactive with the public? Is it just something pretty that people will walk past on the towpath but no one else can see? How's it going to be maintained? Because boats will rot over time, and who's going to pay for that? Thank you.
So as an start, I mean, I've seen the design. I don't know if it's been widely published or not, but it's a curved design. So it's a traditional canal boat, but then it loops around, so it's been twisted, and it's the artist's sort of signature. Right? So it should be, it's quite inventive. It will be moored at the marina, so that's where it will be visible from. As far as I'm aware, it will be illuminated at night via solar, as far as I'm aware. Again, I've read through business cases. I'm not completely aligned with detail. The Canals and Rivers Trust have agreed to conduct the basic maintenance on a day-to-day basis through volunteers, and there is the plan is that hopefully an underspend on the delivery that's in the contingency will then be put aside for a sinking fund effectively for any larger maintenance that needs to be done. But you know, it will have to be maintained. But there are plans in place, and we've discussed that with I think it's the head of arts, Rebecca Maddox, has been in touch with me about that.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I've been involved with a project on and off since 2008 when we got the money from Ian, 500,000, which sounded, you know, great. We've got 500,000 for an art project. However, there's a lot of difficulty in, you know, delivering something like this. And the rest of the money eventually came from British Land, and I think the 106 money was from IKEA, I think. However, you know, we've not been able to attract significant sums that we would like to have attracted from outside, because there was another iteration of this art project a few years ago, and now it's been come up with this other project. The artist himself is very well known worldwide, so you could Google him and look at his other art projects that he's delivered. But I think it's not just about having something pretty on the canal. It's about encouraging people to get out and walk along the canal, and for other people to come along, including the Riverside Trust, Kelham Riverside Trust, to come and invest in the canal so that people can use it not just for cycling, which they do now, but for walking, especially for people down in Tinsley, you know, because they are a bit isolated, they're surrounded by industry. So having something on the canal that is more than just pretty will be of benefit, I think, and I would like to think that we could develop on this as we go forward into the future. So it's taken a long time, but we are there, and there are other benefits other than just an art project. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no further questions or comments, so thank you very much, Damon. I think there's lots of really exciting projects on the capital approvals, you know, Safer Roads, the Youth Investment Fund, Council Housing New Build, and the Tinsley Art Project. So some really good stuff in there. So thank you very much. There is recommendations for approval. Can I ask committee, are we all agreed? Yep, that's agreed. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item. This is item number 10, Economic Recovery Fund Round 2. And this is on page 121 of the agenda pack. And Sarah Laurie-Jones will be presenting. Thank you.
Good afternoon, councillors. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon and considering this report that's before you today. My name's Sarah Laurie-Jones. I work in the Economic Strategy team in the council, which is part of the Economic Development and Culture and Skills Directorate, headed up by Diana Buckley. But for the past couple of years, I've essentially been managing the Economic Recovery Fund. So I realise you have a busy agenda, so if you're comfortable, Chair, I'll kind of give you a bit of brief background and summarise the key points in the paper, and hopefully allow you some time for questions on the paper as well. Before I dive into that though, I just wanted, with your permission again, Chair, to note and acknowledge and thank the many people who've been involved in the Recovery Fund, both to date, but specifically in the application process that we've had so far. The paper probably belies the number of people who've been involved in the sheer amount of work that's gone into all of the applications, both successful and unsuccessful. So we've had a team of 6 business information officers working in Business Sheffield out there supporting businesses and collaborations. There are a team of 5 application development workers. There's of course been a kind of wider council team at the centre of that as well, and the many project teams that have come together in their local communities talking about how they want to improve their local high street. So I just wanted to thank really everyone that's been involved, and I'm sure you would join me in that too. Thank you. So just as a bit of a kind of background then, because it is a bit different, the Economic Recovery Fund is a £2 million grant fund, and it was developed as a flagship part of the city's economic response to the pandemic, and it sits within the Business Recovery Plan in which that response sits, and it's still the kind of key strategic document this programme speaks to, although it cuts across a number of objectives in the council's delivery plan as well. But it is different. It's not a grant fund to individual businesses in the way that many of the COVID business grants were, and it's allocated to project areas brought together by collaborations of local businesses and others for the broader benefit of the high street. So not for the individual benefit of specific businesses necessarily, but for the broader benefit and impact for the high street. But that collaboration wasn't just about local individuals and forums and other organisations coming together. It was about a collaboration between us as a council and those teams as well. So it was us trying to kind of demonstrate a slightly different way of working. In some ways, us being enabling and empowering of local groups of people and allowing them to kind of deliver things they felt were important for their local high streets. So the first round was initially launched in March 21 and 26 projects were funded through that. And we are just closing the final 2 remaining projects now. So it's been live for, as I say, a couple of years, and the impacts have been really positive. There's an independent evaluation that's been undertaken, and the report is on the council's webpage. But essentially, for every £1 spent in the round 1 of the Economic Recovery Fund, we've essentially doubled our money in terms of the social impact, and obviously there's a further narrative in the evaluation report as well. But a further round of £2 million was agreed by full council in February 22, and the shape and purpose of that further round of funding was developed over summer and autumn by the Economic Development and Skills Policy Committee, who agreed the form of the fund back in October last year. The new round was launched to new applications in February this year, and therefore this report really updates the committee on the current position, having completed the application process and the scoring that the steering group completed. Appendix 2 gives you the list of all of the applications received to the fund, all of which were considered and scored by the steering group, and the successful projects will have received a funding offer, which is also included in that appendix number 2. Also included in the report is an overview of how those 23 individual projects actually makes up the ERF grant fund as a programme. It gives you the kind of spread across the city. There's a map in Appendix 3, I think it is, that kind of just shows you the shape across the city. And I think hopefully you'll see an improvement in the spread of the successful projects from round 1 to round 2. And indeed, quite a number of new areas have come forward as well, and 16 completely new areas to the ERF have come forward and received a funding offer as well. So we're really trying through the ERF to start these discussions and create these new collaborations in lots of different communities. And I should say as well at this point that even for those projects that were unsuccessful in securing funding through the second round of the Economic Recovery Fund, the steering group were very, very clear that they didn't want that to be the end of the conversation, and so a further point of contact has been provided through the local area committee teams to have that onward conversation about the other ways in which their project teams and businesses and high streets can be supported, and where possible and necessary, whether there are other options for funding that could be explored as well. And that was something the steering group were very emphatic about. I know councillors in the first round of funding were very concerned about areas considered as being more deprived, as determined by the indices of multiple deprivation, that those areas weren't disadvantaged through the application process, and we put quite a lot of effort into ensuring that wasn't the case. For example, by having application development workers in place and put alongside any team that required support during that process. And hopefully, as the statistics in the report show, that those areas were not disadvantaged and in fact did better out of the process than areas that potentially didn't have those needs. So the report essentially, it comes at a time of change, I suppose, in the life of the Economic Recovery Fund. So we've had the application and scoring phase. There's a set of projects that have come forward that have been successful through that. They've received a funding offer, and the ask really is that you would approve those of a value of greater than £50,000 to be allocated funding, and for us as a council to enter into a funding agreement with the appropriate lead organisation locally. And that's in recommendation 1. And the second is really just to note the wider projects that make up the totality of that 23 projects. So there are 9 listed in recommendation 1 that we're asking to fund with an amount greater of £50,000, and a further 14 that would sit under the Office of Delegations that have a value of £50,000 or less. So that, the legal implications, the equality, diversity and inclusion implications, that all sits in the second part of the report. But I'd be more than happy to take any questions on anything in there that you wanted to raise.
Thank you, Councillor Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I think mine's more of a looking forward question, but so my question would be, what lessons have we learned from the first round? Are there any changes to financial monitoring that that you could do to ensure that expenditure around this is more accurately reflected? And obviously going into next year's budget, there will be key demands for us to have a further round and more, because clearly the economy is not doing well, both locally here or nationally, so there will be clearly much more support required. So it's more of a, what lessons can we learn from previously that we could take forward for next year's budget?
Thanks. I mean, we've learnt an enormous amount through delivering this fund, and, you know, when we launched the first round of applications in March 21, the local area committee teams were not yet established. You know, it kind of came before a lot of these kind of structures and relationships were kind of in place. Obviously, we learned an enormous amount through just delivering ourselves and feeding into the evaluation report that I mentioned earlier, and all of the recommendations that were made in that report we've gone forward and tried to implement for this round of funding as well, and more. So just in terms of the learning on how to support our projects more and increase kind of skills transfer and capability building in local areas, we have a plan that we'd like to implement around offering training and support and advice. We want to have a guidebook that kind of says, so you want to do a street art project, here's what, you know, here's what Project X did in the first round of funding, here's what you could consider. So we're really hoping to wrap an enormous amount of support around our projects this year, and really build on what we've delivered last year, and also create a kind of toolkit that other people in the council might also be able to benefit from. We know that that's something the local area committee teams would like to see as well. So in terms of the learning, we're absolutely committed to doing things better than last year. We'll absolutely be the first people to acknowledge that it wasn't perfect. We were doing it at speed. We were learning as we went. We changed things as we went as well, as we learned things. And in terms of the monitoring process, that will look slightly different to people who went through ERF1. So we're going to we've got some new processes in place that will hopefully make it much clearer to people what is expected, when we'll be asking for information, what information we'll be asking for, what constitutes acceptable evidence of spend and what doesn't, so that that's crystal clear for everyone at the outset. So the monitoring process will be, and it worked well last year, I should say. We've been able to demonstrate the spend on all of the projects really. But in terms of a further round of funding, of course, that'll be a councillor decision. And we have been asked the question of by the Recovery Fund Steering Group on this. And I think it'll be really important, as you say, to consider what's needed now, given that there's a very different economic context to that in which this fund was conceived back in the end of 2020. But there's also a broader strategic position that's emerging, I think, from the council. So the city goals, I imagine we'll start talking about neighbourhoods and high streets and the kinds of, aspirations we might have for them. And I think the Recovery Fund will need to listen to that broader strategic position, probably talk to everyone who's been part of the Recovery Fund before, and again, learn from the second round. And I think we'll just need to develop a set of considerations and recommendations for councillors to make a decision on, really. But if anyone has any really clear views and ideas about that, I'd be really happy to listen to those in advance of any of that work starting. Is that okay, councillor?
Councillor Mollison.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for all the work you're doing. I haven't really got a question. I've got just a statement about what's happened in Hillsborough, which we're really, really grateful for. It has made a massive improvement to the shopping centre in Hillsborough. I think it's made it much more attractive to local people, which keeps them local. and the diversity of shops has improved in recent years. I don't know if all that can be pinned on this, but the feel of the place and all the new street furniture, the artwork has made it a much more vibrant feeling place. And it's also, I think, one of the main benefits is it's brought or strengthened the group of shops, the businesses all working together under Hillsborough Together, who are now more articulate as a group, which again strengthens the local community, basically, and the business community as well as the broader community. So I think there's a lot of positives to be gained from looking at what's happened in Hillsborough, and we're very grateful for the way it's been managed.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, they've been an excellent team. We've seen some lovely things come from that project area, and it's very pleasing that they'll be able to build from a really strong foundation in round one and move that forward to round two, because they're a team that's always had a kind of longer term ambition and vision for their high street area. So thank you, and I'll pass those comments on to them. I'm sure you have.
Thank you, Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you. And Darnell's been successful, so we're very pleased about that one. It's just, you've said at the beginning, round one, my guess is there was a lot of organisations that put forward a bid that were quite, had a lot of expertise and capacity to do that, and you've learnt from that, and we know that there's other areas where the capacity isn't as great as it could be. So that, you know, that has fed into this in round two. What advice would you give somewhere like Darnell, where, you know, we've got lots of businesses and a nice district shopping centre, but, you know, obviously this will improve things, but in the longer term, what can we do to help those businesses, do you think? What's the learning that you've had that we can then put into practice to engage those businesses to work together more? Because I think that's what we've been missing in some places.
Thank you. That's an interesting question. I think what I'd say is we've learnt that it's hard, actually, and we've learnt that it's time consuming, and it really takes drive and resource in some ways to take a conversation forward. And that exists in spades in some areas and is perhaps just nascent or lacking in others. So, I mean, I think there's certainly a role for us as a council to support people and to guide them and advise them. But I think it is just different in different areas. You know, working with the Coalition of the Willing is really what the Economic Recovery Fund has been doing. And so where there is one in a community, the more support and encouragement we can wrap around that, the better. And of course, where there's learning from ERF1 and hopefully ERF2, we'll be sharing that as well and hoping to provide that guidance, expertise and experience to them. And in fact, we're hoping to do that with an induction process. So we want to get all of the successful projects from this round, gather them in a room, start that networking process so they can do that self-organisation. In fact, some projects are already doing that. I was at a meeting this morning with the Walkley Infirmary Road, Middlesbrough and Hillsborough projects. They're already starting to self-organise in some ways about how they can share that learning, and we will certainly be coordinating that from the centre as well. And we'll have some voices from ERF1 providing a kind of learning experience at that as well, which I think there's nothing more powerful than hearing from people who've done it themselves.
Thank you, Councillor Ulla.
Chair, I'd like to commend the work Sarah and her team have done to oversee and deliver this latest round of ERF funding. I believe having application support officers have been very useful, for particularly in London Road. Businesses, they found that very useful. People, groups that are not familiar with the processes, I think they benefited from having an application support officer. Obviously, as a councillor for Nether Edge and Sharrow, I'm delighted that 2 applicants from my ward have secured more than £180,000. London Road have secured over £142,000, which is the largest award for any single applicant. Independent Aberdeen have secured over £37,000. I hope that this grant money will not only contribute to economic renewal of London Road, which is a major road in Sheffield, but also celebrate the uniqueness and bring the multicultural community together through organising multicultural activities. So overall, I think this whole ERF funding has been a success, and I'd like to commend officers for the work they've done.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor. We really look forward to working with the London Road team.
Thank you, Councillor Ulla. I think you've rounded that up really well. Thank you, Sarah and team, for helping projects across Sheffield in the ERF funding. Oh, sorry, the chaplain.
Thank you, Chair. More than happy to thank officers for this report, and clearly a lot of local shopping areas have really benefited from this. I suppose my question is similar to Mary's in that just as your team has put in a lot of work, it was essentially competitive, so a lot of groups have put in a lot of work, but some of them have lost out and are not gained any financial benefit for their centre or for their area. I'm in the invidious position that happened to two of the centres in Southey Ward, with Buchanan Road and Margaretson Crescent in Parson Cross. That it does take, both were, as I understand it, led primarily by voluntary sector organisations. In one case, Parson Cross, a particularly small one. So it was quite a big ask on them to try and get local business people on board so that they could come up with a workable bid. And I just wondered if you'd noticed any difference in the success rates based on who were the leaders and the movers in those groups, which ultimately led to a strong bid that was accepted.
Thank you, Councillor. That's not something we've looked at directly, actually, but I absolutely can do and get back to you separately on that. Certainly was something we noticed in the first round of funding, which I wouldn't necessarily apply completely directly now, was that those teams that engaged with us and engaged with the council in developing their application tended to do better from the application process. Because it's so unique, it's quite a difficult one to get your head around, and so those teams that had a chat with us, sent us a draft application to look through, received our comments on that, tended to do better from the process. I haven't done that analysis on round two. It could be one factor, but it's certainly something we can look at, I think. And again, in working with these different local areas, it hopefully isn't just the end of that conversation, and those collaborations can continue in a slightly different way than they might have otherwise, even without funding. And that's certainly the message we've got back from some of those areas where those conversations have picked up. There's still kind of an ambition, an aspiration to do something positive for their high street with or without a big chunk of council funding. But any way in which we can continue that support, more than happy to have that conversation.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for your team. I'm pleased that you said that there is support available for unsuccessful applications via the steering group, so I think that's really important. But thank you very much for all your support, and well done to all the successful applicants. I'm sure it'll be amazing for their communities. There is recommendations for approval. Can I ask, are we all agreed? Yeah, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 11, sale of land at Cotton Mill Road, Kelham Road, and Tammy Whittaker will be presenting.
Hello everybody, my name's Tammy Whittaker, I'm Head of Regeneration and Property Services. I'll outline the main purpose of the report for you and happy to answer any questions. If there are any questions that relate to the appendix, can I ask that they're flagged so that we can take them in closed session? Thank you. The proposal is for the sale of the council's interest in Cotton Mill Row. It's a 0.17 acre site adjacent to the ring road, and the proposal is to sell the land by private treaty to the adjacent landowner to enable development of both the site owned by the existing landowner and the land owned by the council as a mixed-use residential-led scheme. The site was originally acquired in 2006 as part of the Inner Relief Road as a part of a wider land acquisition. The reason for the sale to the adjacent landowner is that it's a relatively small site and that development in isolation would not result in the best scheme. Feedback from planning has suggested that by merging the two sites together, a more sympathetic and better scheme can be achieved on the edge of the conservation area. The scheme proposed is for 143 apartments and 3 commercial units and a mix of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments with 4 studios. A number of conditions are attached to the land sale to ensure that the site is built out in line with other conditions that we routinely put in place. The details of the transaction are set out in the appendix. I think that's all I want to say at this point in time, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Is there any questions or comments? No? No, so there isn't any questions and comments, Tammy. So we do have recommendations for approval. Are we all agreed? Yep, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of the meeting. The next meeting will be held on the 16th of October. See you all then. Thank you very much.